Hi, thanks for joining me for this AWS Summit online session. My name is Celine DeGraw. I'm the Worldwide Digital Transformation Advisor for governments at Amazon Web Services. And I work with governments around the world to help them leverage modern digital technologies to meet the needs and expectations of their citizens. This is a topic that's really top of mind for many governments around the world and of particular interest in recent months. So my goal today is to share some of the most critical components to successful digital transformation in governments. And I'll share some examples of how governments around the world have done it. All right, let's get started. When I talk to government customers, it's clear that their need for digital transformation actually has little to do with the technology and everything to do with their business mission. And most governments want three things. The first is to deliver great services to their citizens, because in a world in which we can order transportation or make payments with the touch of a button, they're really facing increased expectations from their citizens who expect to be able to access public services or pay their taxes just as easily. So governments are seeking to close that gap and transform their existing services or expand what they do. Secondly, governments want to lower their costs, because they're on the front line of citizen services and they face many obstacles in providing services, from aging population to budget shortfalls and just generally challenging fiscal environments. And then thirdly, governments want to mitigate risks and be future-proof. COVID-19 has really highlighted that unexpected events do happen and governments must be able to remain operational. In a matter of weeks, we've seen agencies at every level of government quickly adapt the way that they work to meet the new and urgent needs of their citizens. And governments that are embarking on a digital transformation want to be better ready for that. So when we talk about digital transformation, the transformation part refers to delivering great services to citizens, being prepared for the future, and doing more for less. The digital part is just the best way to get there. And in this sense, cloud computing is a game changer. With COVID-19, we've seen governments around the world turn to the cloud because it was the best way to build and extend solutions in a fraction of the time and with a fraction of the resources that it would have otherwise needed. One example of this is Italy. To comply with measures that were restricting the movement of people, the municipal government of Cagliari was able to move 344 employees to virtual desktop interfaces on AWS in only 3 days. And they then extended that to cover over 460 employees who were able to use the applications on the company's intranet as if they were in the office. I think it's really amazing to see what they were able to do, and that every government is able to be as agile as a startup whenever they need to be. But more importantly, it's also a new normal, really. Governments will continue to tap into these new ways of working, whether they're working remotely or using virtual call centers, because it delivers immense value to both the service teams and to citizens. So today I'll talk for about 30 minutes about the critical components to a truly successful transformation within government. Some of those components probably need to be led from the top, but others can be led at any level of the organization, including operations teams across government. I'll also make sure to share examples of governments that have succeeded at those goals of delivering great services, lowering costs, and also mitigating risks to start becoming as agile as startups. And the first point that I want to talk about is leadership alignment. Because leadership alignment is critical in any organization, regardless of size or of industry. In fact, AWS CEO Andy Jassy spoke about this in his keynote at re:Invent in December 2019. For startups, it's really easy. They have smaller teams, the CEO wears a t-shirt, making him or her really approachable. Everyone can share ideas of a free breakfast. But in governments, it's a little bit different, really. There's definitely fewer t-shirts and fewer freebies, but they're also often a lot more bureaucratic and hierarchical. And that makes alignment at the top just more important. The leaders that I work with that are successful in their transformation are those who recognize how important it is for their leadership to be on board with the transformation and stop thinking and acting as if they're special or different from other organizations, governments, or private sector companies, because they're mostly not. At the core, leaders that are serious about transforming, they implement design thinking. and they implement it at the core of their work, and then they get alignment and get buy-in from other leaders. They start with the users, their customers, and they focus on what they need and what the government can do for their customers. How they do that, the technology that they choose, comes at the end as the mechanism to serve their citizens. And that's important because it's a lot harder to get consensus on the technology compared to getting it on customer outcomes. Because reducing cost isn't something everyone will jump out of their seats to help with, but doing more for citizens really is. And everyone can get behind that. It just opens up the conversation on the goals and just naturally opens up the conversation on the technology and how best to achieve those goals. So most leaders will say that they focus on users, but that focus needs to be clearly articulated and repeated often with clear goals attached to them. For instance, several governments have implemented a cloud-first strategy to encourage using modern and innovative technologies that allow them to be much faster and much more responsive to their users' needs and not be limited by a costly infrastructure and services that they can deploy on it. And because governments are so hierarchical, decisions from the top can really have a huge impact. So governments that are successful at leading change, they share their motivations for the transformation very clearly to everyone across every agency, and that helps to reduce any risk of misinterpretation. And the best way to do this is just to articulate the change publicly, not just how the change is going to happen, but also the why. The changes that they're asking for, they take effort. They require everyone to change the way that they think, perhaps learn new skills, and also to change the way that they do their jobs every day. So leaders really have to get everyone excited and motivated for the changes so that those actually doing the change don't see them as yet another burden that they have to carry and therefore might resist it. It also gives government employees a license to innovate because they'll understand where there is flexibility and where there isn't. So they don't have to fear that they're doing the wrong thing whenever they're trying something new. And startups really do this very well. They use catchy mission statements like transportation as reliable as running water everywhere and for everyone, or working life simpler, more pleasant and productive. They print them on t-shirts in colorful fonts on the walls all around the office. Governments are unlikely to fill the country's walls with their mission statements, but they do have a myriad of platforms that they can use to reinforce their public commitments and then repeat them often. Finally, the most successful strategies that I've seen have some teeth, like being tied to spend controls is a great way. But they're also aspirational and they talk about the future. They have time-bound goals that highlight that they're serious about the transformation, because something taking 3 years to implement, if it's a short-term, high-impact goal, it just defeats the point of saying that it's a priority. A great example of this is what the government of Brazil has done. They've implemented design thinking successfully to get alignment within their leadership and to move to action on their digital transformation across governments. In recent years, the government was facing challenging times with fiscal constraints and low citizen trust at really all levels of government. And they knew that citizen services were at the center of regaining that citizen trust, and so they implemented a broad digital transformation strategy that really focused around answering 2 questions. What are the services we deliver, and how exactly do we deliver that to citizens? They shifted their entire focus from online touchpoints and IT infrastructure to look at the humans behind the technology. So today, they work directly with citizens and managers, mapping users' journeys and testing prototypes and just radically changing their approach to technology. There's plenty more work ahead, but their strategy and the design thinking that they use is already delivering important benefits. In 2019, they launched 400 new digital services. 51% of those services are now digital, and the impact is about to reach $185 million in annual savings for service users and for government. We go into a lot more details about leadership alignment in our executive education course in government transformation. It's an intensive 3-day MBA-style course that's delivered by leading business schools and experienced public service leaders that have delivered national-scale technology and business reforms that has resulted in significant savings and better public services. In order to comply with recent travel restrictions, we've shifted these courses online, but they're designed to equip leaders with the confidence and the expertise that they need to transform public services and to meet the future needs of their citizens. Leaders can apply or nominate a delegate through the link on the slide, or they can reach out directly to their account manager if they're interested in this. So leadership alignment is important because public sector really leads from the top, and it helps provide context within which to move. So that's really the first critical component for transformation. Now, the second component that I want to talk about is culture. And everyone talks about culture, and that's really for a lot of good reasons. It's important and it can be done at all levels of government. But few can move to action. So I want to talk about some concrete ways to change a culture within government. You're probably all very familiar with the phrase culture eats strategy for breakfast. What it highlights is the need to change the corporate culture in order for a strategy to be successful. And that may be true, but it's not very specific and it doesn't provide any information on how to actually do it. I really like what Mark Heed says when he talks about how that saying is applied in public service, in public sector, which is that process eats culture for breakfast. Civil servants are creative and they want to be innovative. They're people too, but process can come to dominate everything that governments do, and then they start becoming the thing, the focus. And these processes in public sector and in government are rarely updated. So in a fast-moving society like ours, they quickly become antiquated. They focus on threats that are physical instead of digital, for instance. And those processes can swallow the best of intention when they work, and even more so when they're broken. So changing processes to change the culture within government can be a bit of a hard sell, but I want to talk about some concrete ways to start fostering that culture of innovation within government. One strategy that's been successful for many agencies is to find a project that delivers value to the business quickly, and it won't break anything important if it doesn't work. Something that can be done in a few weeks, something that you weren't doing already, a new development essentially. The teams can work on a proof of concept, and I guarantee that bringing a POC that improves the business in some meaningful way, where you can talk about the risks and how you're mitigating them, goes a long way and is more valuable and less scary than tackling a huge issue off the bat or coming with an unproven proposal to do something innovative. Here, I'll share a very personal example. At AWS, we quickly realized that the COVID-19 virus was becoming a global phenomenon, and it was moving very fast. So we saw that some of our teams were working to solve a customer need that had just been solved by a different team around the world, and so we needed to share information more quickly than usual. So a small Tiger team put together a process to showcase solutions that had worked for one customer with teams all around the world. We were able to quickly identify what should or shouldn't be shared, and within just a couple of hours, we had a simple tool that could help us support our customers a lot faster, and we just had to get the word out. Over the next several weeks, we added further improvements like integration with our CRM to help teams move faster, but it really added a lot of value very quickly. So a great way to get started is to assemble a team or find colleagues that are curious and motivated and excited about the technology to be an innovation unit and a champion within the agency. Attitude here, for me, is equally as valuable as experience. If you're a leader, you can do this at a much larger scale, obviously, and you can find specific services for the teams to focus their innovation on. One example of this is GDS, the UK Government Digital Services. 18F and USDS in the US are modeled on them. You may be familiar with them. This is them here. They don't exactly look like your typical government employees. They're really the transformation unit of the UK, and they were once described as the best startup in Europe that nobody can invest in. The GDS team in many ways has acted as a carrot to the spend control stick in the UK, and the services that they've built have won international awards and had positive articles written about them in the press. Geeks in Jeans, Saving Government, and so on. So their success meant that departments and ministers also wanted to be more digital and use more cloud. You can also change the culture in a different way, which is by changing the incentives, implementing a performance platform, for instance, that meets the transparency goals of many governments and that makes digital transformation core to the value of the work. To build on an earlier example, I used the example of the government of Brazil implementing user design. Well, that was the basis for creating and publishing a dashboard to monitor digital federal services in July 2019. It unifies more than 1,500 URLs and over 100 apps under one same umbrella. And it showcased the digital transformation of public agencies across different states and federal levels and across services. And so not only are they offering a transparent view into the government's efforts, but in just 1 year, they've been able to digitally transform 68 public services and save 90% of service costs to governments and society. So all of this has had a broader impact because Brazil is now the 44th most digital government in the world, according to the UN e-government survey, and that's 7 positions higher than they were in 2016. That's really a great example of how creating different incentives can radically change the culture and the way that government works. Finally, governments that are most successful at changing their processes and their culture are those who embrace open standards. And open standards really help improve accessibility and interoperability, and they avoid vendor lock-in. And they're really nothing new. It's what has allowed electricity to cross borders, for instance, and they're the bedrock of much of the innovation that we've seen today on the internet, from the World Wide Web to Android operating systems and AWS services like Amazon Elasticsearch. You know, it's really amazing because COVID-19 has really brought about a global community that we shouldn't lose, because governments don't compete with each other. I still haven't seen a government Department of Transportation gaining market share in another country. So governments should reuse the code, the processes, and so on that have been successfully implemented in one country in order to accelerate their own transformation. And in the wake of COVID-19, we've seen governments share open source and open data more than ever before, and that's unlikely to stop. At AWS, we launched in 2006, and we've contributed to a broad variety of open source software projects since then. We're continuing to do that, to help our customers, but we've also launched the Open Government Solution very recently. OGS is an online catalog of open source digital services, standards, and also digital best practices that have been implemented by governments around the world. This resource helps governments and agencies at the local, regional, and national level find solutions that have worked for other governments and that can accelerate their digital transformation. You can check out Open Government Solutions on AWS website today, and you can share the catalog with your organization. Okay, so I've talked about the importance of leadership and how to foster a culture of innovation, but the reality is that there can still be barriers to digital transformation that need to be broken down. The ones that I hear most often from governments, just really around the world, are security and procurement. So governments often think that they have different, higher security needs than startups or commercial companies. But the reality is that governments aren't that different in this regard. Startups handle business confidential information, financial information, and sometimes even healthcare information, all of which needs to have a high bar for security. But they're also able to use innovative technologies. Governments that struggle with digital transformation often have blanket policies that apply to all data, or they use antiquated policies that would be better suited for an analog world where data is stored physically, not digitally. So they focus their security policies at the physical layer, but when leveraging the cloud on AWS, customers always retain the ownership of their data. They can protect it at the data layer with encryption and with granular access control and just a lot of sophisticated security tools. Beyond that, they also benefit from security at the physical layer that's often far superior than even what the largest governments and largest enterprises can afford themselves. Because, frankly, that's our business. While the business of government is to serve citizens, not build and manage data centers. So governments also benefit from the same security standards that are in place for our most demanding customers, like international banks and national security agencies. In fact, AWS has had service offerings and a supply chain vetted as secure enough for top secret workloads. So instead of implementing blanket policies, a more effective way to uphold a high security bar is to implement a really modern data classification. It enables governments to tag data and provide guidance on how to appropriately use technologies for each classification tier. And it enables agencies to implement the innovative technologies to increase their business efficiency. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, recommends 3 categories because most of government data is routine business operational information, no more sensitive than commercially sensitive information, and so they can use the same technologies and controls used by startups and enterprises. One example is in 2014, the UK government introduced a new classification system that rationalized the number of classifications, and it basically said that over 90% of government data is the same as any other commercially sensitive data in the commercial sector, even in its aggregate. The second barrier I hear the most from governments is procurement. Today, all services in government use some IT, and in time, they'll use lots of it. COVID-19 has shown that being able to quickly procure the appropriate technology is a pressing need in time of crisis, but it's also the case when governments are operating as usual in order to ensure business continuity and resiliency. Traditional procurement practices are often long and expensive and complicated, and they ultimately delay improvements to citizen services. They lead to contracts being awarded to few large service providers that build lock-in through license-based services and decrease competition. So enabling cloud adoption within government allows small providers to compete for contracts, and it allows governments to quickly change one piece of the stack and then reuse interfaces across agencies and across services. I really like a grocery store analogy. The cloud is a bit like a grocery store where you buy the things that you need to make a meal. And it's easy to buy in the cloud in the way it's sold and just like it is sold at a grocery store where you can buy a can of soup or a bunch of bananas, but you never ask for half a banana. So that's really the main thing for me that makes a good framework. Several governments like the UK and Italy have implemented cloud procurement vehicles, and they're now seeing the benefits of that. They're reaping the rewards. Their digital marketplaces use standardized contract terms and pre-approved suppliers that meet the privacy and security requirements to enable governments to have access to innovative and modern technologies. And it also opens up the door for small and medium enterprises to compete for contracts. In July 2018, G-Cloud sales in the UK were over 4.3 billion, and 46% of the total sales by value and 69% by volume were from SMEs. So finally, the last component that I want to talk about is about building capabilities. The cloud isn't hard, but it's different, and it's different by design. I find that here a driving analogy is really helpful because most of us can remember the trials of learning to drive when we had no experience and possibly a parent buckling their seatbelt getting into the car with us. But with experience and with training, we quickly learn to shift gears and change lanes and even merge onto highways without really barely thinking about it. So, most governments that I work with, they see their lack of cloud skills as a primary reason that they haven't made as much progress towards their cloud journey. But the reality is that the existing workforce has valuable institutional knowledge that's hard to replace, and then acquiring new talent is difficult and expensive, especially at scale. So it's much more effective to invest in upskilling through training and creating opportunities for the existing staff to move roles. And it also helps to reduce the fears and frictions that comes with changes, and it helps converting cloud skeptics into true believers. At AWS, we have lots of events such as this one, training offerings, and a huge ecosystem of partners to help upskill employees into any job category. So I really recommend seeking out training opportunities, whether at AWS summits or through our website, or leveraging our partner network to help you really move fast. So to finish up, what does the government of the future look like? COVID-19 has shown that our challenges have no borders and they can spread exponentially in the future. The government of the future will leverage innovative technologies in a scalable way, securely, and with business availability in the cloud. And there's really 4 main components that government leaders can embrace today to build resilience and to offer services that will delight their citizens. The governments of the futures have alignment across their leadership, and they use user-centric policies, use a culture of innovation where experimentation is encouraged, and they have broken down barriers through modern procurement vehicles and implementing modern data classification. Finally, they build up capabilities to empower government workers to really leverage modern technologies. That's all from me. Thank you so much for watching this presentation. I hope you found it useful, and please share your feedback by completing the session evaluation.